Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm beyond happy to see so many faces that I missed and love from around the country and the world. So thank you all so much for being here. And a special thank you and giant virtual hug to our friends who are joining from the West Coast, where they're contending with fire and smoke, and also from down south, where Hurricane Sally has torn in and created some hiccups for people. So thank you again all for uh, managing to be with us today despite the challenges. I'm Bethany Burke with Taub Family Selections, and we are the exclusive importer of the incredible wines that we'll be tasting today. Each of our panelists represents the next generation of her family-owned winery, and we are so excited to dig in over the next hour or so with some great conversation, tasting, of course, and maybe, just maybe, some musical entertainment. We'll see. I've personally had the pleasure of working with multiple generations from each of these estates over my past 18 years with Taub Family Selections, which is also a fourth generation family-owned company, by the way. And I can say the future is absolutely bright for each of these estates. We'll hear from Alan Trimbach from Alsace, Alessia Coletta from Gattinara and Piemonte, and Laura Colombo from the Northern Rhone Valley. But first, I'd like to introduce our esteemed moderator. Dr. Lara Catena is a fourth generation Argentine vintner. I know most of you know and love her well, and probably know her as managing director of her family winery, Bodegas Catena Zapata, and quite possibly as the most dynamic face of Argentine wine that we have in the world today. However, we at Taub Family Selections work with her in her capacity as proprietor of Bodegas Paro. Lara, please tell us a bit about the Paro project before you introduce our panelists.
Thank you very much, Bethany. First, I want to say that it's so exciting to be chosen as the elder stateswoman moderator, because I am older than these beautiful, energetic young women. And I can tell you what's even more sort of heartwarming is that when I was being introduced, when I was younger, I was always introduced by men. And it's so wonderful to have that role, to be able to introduce as maybe the little older, I don't want to talk about my age, but the older woman, these beautiful young generations in wine. But in terms of the Caro story, which is such a beautiful story, I am actually sitting here with the background of the cava from the winery. You know, when we were changing the history of Argentine wine, starting exports of high quality Argentine wine throughout the world, we met the Rothschild family, the Baron Eric de Rothschild. And they had no interest in doing a project in Argentina because it was this unstable economically and politically crazy country in South America. But my father tempted them to come and taste the wines. And they fell in love actually with our Cabernet Sauvignon. And then the Malbec, which had been such an important grape in Bordeaux and was, you know, no longer planted there. And they fell in love with Argentina, and they decided actually, after being very reluctant, to form this partnership. And what I always like to thank them for is that, you know, Chateau Lafite, possibly the most famous wine in the world. You would have thought they might be a little snobby or, you know, talk down to us. And from the beginning, it's been a 50-50 partnership. When I go to Bordeaux, I stay at the Chateau. The name Catena Rothschild Caro is the two names equally. In fact, my father thought the name should be Roca, but it was already trademarked. And the Baron Eric said, no, I like Caro. And so this is a beautiful wine, Malbec Cabernet Sauvignon. You will be tasting it. But most of all, it's a beautiful story of two families coming together. So Bethany, are we ready for me to introduce the stars of the day?
Let's do it.
Yes, okay. So I'm going to ask some questions to our great family winemakers here. Ladies, you just go ahead and answer as you like. So Laure and I met in Bordeaux once. We were both having a party at the same restaurant, and we had so much fun with Laure and her father. And the parties ended up mixing in because they are such a dynamic family. And what I'm really curious about Laure is her background. Before she started working for the family, she actually interned or worked in India, in Walt Disney, all around France, all over the world. So I'd love to know, what was her inspiration for having such a diverse experience before working with the family? And second, I'd like her to tell us about her life working in one project with her father and in another with her husband. I work with my father, and that is fantastic, but I could never, ever work with my husband. So I want to know Laure's secrets. And I think we don't hear you, Laure. Put the volume on.
Yeah, it's good. Sorry.
Yes, yes.
Merci, Laura. Hi, everybody. Thanks a lot for organizing all this, Bethany. Laura, you were wondering a bit why I traveled the world before to go back, but I think you never visited Cornas, which is a small village in the middle of nowhere in France. So when you're a teenager, your goal is just to escape this village, to fly away the farthest you can. And that's why I didn't really plan to work in the wine at all. I just wanted to live in big city, attractive city, in New York. So that's why I worked with Palm Bay for an internship in summer. I worked in India because I love this country, and so I was more into marketing. I worked for Moët & Chandon for 1 year to I moved to Bordeaux to work 1 year also for that's really where I learned. Sorry, I have a. You can hear me? I think there were a problem. Oh, it's good. Sorry. And finally, I think that by traveling around the world, what I really learned is that I learned about my roots, and that's why I wanted to come back, because then I realized what my terroir of Cornas was meaning, and that finally making wine in India or in Champagne was not really what I had in my blood. So that's why I came back. But it was not so easy to come back, like you said. To take over, to work with your family is not always easy. Actually, I don't like to say I took over, because it's not true. I didn't take over. I joined the family adventure. But I joined in 2010, and little by little, I learned to work with my dad, with my mom. And in 2018, so basically 8 years after having joined my parents' adventure, there is a big accident. Paul Bocuse, who is a famous chef in France, and he's like my dad's godfather, died in 2018. My dad was 62. And he directly told me that it was his goal in life to be like Paul Bocuse. And I realized that I was 34, so he was 62. So this brings us to 30 years later, because Paul Bocuse dies at 92. So this means I would probably be able to decide what I wanted to do in this cellar when I would be 62, which was a bit a long time for me. So I said, okay, so I think the best thing is to create my own little things on my side, to keep working, join with my parents, but to have my own little playground, exactly. So that's what I did in 2014 in the meantime. With my husband. So like you said, working with husband is the other adventure. But the little things that helped me is that my husband, Dimitri, is a photographer. So he was not at all in the wine. And maybe it is what helped me to to have an advantage on him in terms of winemaking that I don't have with my dad. So actually, then I can really maybe take the decision. He give me his idea, but I am the one who have the final word on Domaine de Lorient, which is the estate I created with him. So that's a bit how we handle our life.
Laure, you completely inspire me. I think you're younger than me, but way more advanced. So I will have to do a consultation with you in the future. But now thank you, Laure. So now let's move to Alessia, who I received the incredible bottle that her beautiful wine is in, and I will be drinking it tonight. But what's really exciting about Alessia is that she actually studied to be a sommelier, and she worked as a sommelier, and she studied economics. So I'd love to hear about what it was like, Alessia, to serve other wines from Italy, from around the world, even if your own family makes wine. And the other thing that I find very inspiring and that I wanted to learn from Alessia is that she says that since she was a little girl, she wanted to be in the family winery. And I was more like Laure, I wanted to do something else. But I want my children to be like Alessia, to want to work with me. So what is the secret, Alessia? And you have to unmute yourself, Alessia.
So thank you, Laura, for your presentation and your introduction, and thank you everybody for being connected tonight. And yes, my personal career and about the studies was mainly during the university. I studied economics, so was mainly focused on the economics side for the business. But actually, in the meantime, I have studied to become a sommelier. And that was very important because this decision became mainly for like a personal curiosity or just a personal knowledge. But this I realized later that was very, very important for like as an experience, because actually during this time of university, I had the chance to work in a restaurant. I did many experiences before starting to work every day in the winery like I'm doing right now. I had the chance, for example, to work as a sommelier for a restaurant, or just as a sommelier during the tastings, the official tastings. And in this situation, I had the chance to speak about and present other wineries' wines. Actually, it was important for me because when I was talking about other wines, in the same time, I was thinking about what I usually say when I speak about my wines. And I try to focus the attention on what are exactly the things that are interesting, of course, for all the people to hear, and what makes this wine and the winery so special and different to the other. So actually, the sommelier period, when I worked for there, actually was very important for open my mind and makes me curious to try new wines.
Sorry, Alessia, I'm just going to interrupt you for one moment. If you could speak a little louder, a couple.
Oh yes, I can try to do that closer, so maybe
Ah,
you can.
Perfect. Yes.
Okay. I was saying that this moment, this period, was very important for me because actually opened the mind to. It makes me curious to try new wines. But mainly focus the attention on the communication of the wine. Because as I said before, the most important thing is not speaking about the single characteristics of the wine, but all the stories behind a bottle of wine. So, for example, what makes this wine special, the wineries, the connection and the link to the territory. So this was my experience outside the winery. I'm so young, so this was the only. And for the second answer, actually, if I have to tell you the truth, when I was very, very young, my dream job was to be a truck driver, lorry driver. Yes, I know it's so strange, but the reason is, I know, the reason is because I live exactly in the front of the winery. So every day I used to see transporter drivers or suppliers driver. And when I was very young, I used to speak with them. So probably this was the region of my dream job, but I know that is something that was impossible. And beside these things, I have to say that for me was very normal to stay close to my parents because they were very great and able to introduce me, but not only me, but also my sister in everyday situation and everyday things of the business of the company. So actually at the beginning it was like a game. Actually, when I was young, everything was like a game. So that's why they little by little transfer to me and my sister the passion for this wine and for this beautiful work. So when I finished the university and when I finished my experience, I decided to enter and working every day in the winery. And if I want to tell you some little things about my little experience in the winery, because I remember when I was young and I used to follow my mom during the tour of the winery with the visitors, and I used to stay behind of the group, and I used to pour my finger inside the barriques to taste the wines, but unfortunately they always find me because of the traces on the leaves. So other things is that, for example, I know that is interesting, but when I was young, like 6-7 years ago, during the winter time, I used to spend my family Sundays in the vineyards during the pruning session, when my father used to speak about how to prune and all the secrets about the vines. So as I said before, everything became little by little natural and by passion. I were not obliged to work.
Well, thank you, Alessia. It seems like your parents have done an extraordinary job in inspiring you. I am taking notes. So now let's move to Anne Trimbach. With, this is literally one of my favorite wines in the world. And she is the 14th generation. I can't imagine, I'm the fourth, and that seems extraordinary. And 14, right? Is it 14?
13 only.
13, oh, okay, only 13. Okay, so the 13th generation of her family making wine. She has this extraordinary legacy. And what I want to know about from Anne is, what did the famous great uncle say about her wanting to get involved in winemaking? She also has degrees in winemaking and economics, getting her boots on and her hands dirty. What did the great uncle and the elder men of the family think about that? And also, I am a huge fan of Trimbach's social media. And I think it's just so authentic. It really speaks with the voice of a family. And I'd love to know about how Anne, works on the social media. I don't know the details. How do you decide what to post? Because I think it's really one of the best in the world. So Anne, please.
Thank you. Thank you for having all of us tonight. It's a great experience. I love it. We should do that more often while weekends traveling. So yes, 13 generations, and first woman to be really on the scene in front of people, because my grandmother has been working very hard in the past, but she was not in front of people. She was helping, cooking, helping to bottle, and etc. And for the last 12 years, I've been traveling extensively. And yes, my great uncle, when I came 12 years ago after my studies, he said, "Oh, really? You want to work with us? But are you sure you're a woman? And one day you have kids? So how will you manage this?" And at the end, I have a wonderful daughter. She's 4.5. And before COVID, I was still able to travel the world and spread the message. So I had to prove that I was able to. And now I think they are happy, I hope at least. And for social media, when I came, the internet world did not exist. Nobody knew how to use even an email. It was very hard for them. So I decided to build a website and slowly share, because it's the world of wine is about sharing wine and knowledge and how you do and how, well, it's sharing. So this is the way to catch the eyes of people and to make them dream about, for me, Alsace, of course, and for them, Rhône, Italy, or wherever, you, Argentina. But it's the way to catch the eyes of people quite easily in a way. And I like to share moments that are important to us. Actually, in a small picture, you can share a lot. So
Can you tell us, Anne, about one of your videos? Like, what happens? Like, does Anne wake up in the morning and you go in the vineyard and you see a sheep and you say, I should do a video? Like, give me some more details, because like I loved some of the videos with, I think, your cousin, or
yes,
they're just so spontaneous. How does the magic happen?
that's a good question. I never thought about that, but I think it just happens. It's yes, I'm here, or my sister sometimes is here, or my cousin, he's with a friend and they are sharing those moments. And I'm not always behind the cell phone myself. Sometimes it's videos that I receive. I'm not always there, but at least we all have the same passion for sharing our love for wine and our love for people, actually, as well.
Wonderful.
Sharing.
Okay, so Anne, I have a very special favor to ask. Because there's a song that I heard recently that I think can bring people together, and I'd like everybody to put their microphone on. So so there's a tradition in the Trimbach family that some of you might know, and I would like Anne to tell us about the tradition and to lead us into the Trimbach song. Please, Anne.
I get red. It's an old song that my great uncle Hubert invented a while ago when he was stuck in a train while traveling somewhere in the US close to New York, and that's like 40 plus years ago. And since then, since I started to work 12 years ago, I've been asked to sing this song every time. And when I was 15, I hated this song. I really hated it. But it's part of us now for 3 generations. So for Hubert, my great uncle, we can sing this beautiful song. My bottle lies over the ocean. My bottle lies over the sea.
My
Bottle lies over the ocean. Don't blame back my bottles to me.
Okay, one more
Yes.
time.
Trimbach, Trimbach.
Trimbach, bring back my bottle.
To me. Trimbach,
To me. Cheers.
Bravo! Well, Bethany, I don't know if you would like for us to talk among us women, or I think we're getting pretty close to the time to start the tasting. I am passing on the introductions to you, Bethany.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all very much, and I'll just take a moment. If anybody has any questions they want to ask up to this point, please feel free to chime in. Otherwise, I think we'll get right into the tasting. So the first wine that we have is our Trimbach Riesling Reserve 2017. So I'm going to turn it over to Anne Trimbach. Maybe.
I'm drinking almost the same. I'm cheating. I have one vintage after you, but I remember the 17 quite well as well. This is our Riesling Reserve bottling, and as you may know, we produce lots of Riesling. We love this grape. It's 50% of our production, and it has been a wine that we've been producing for, I would say, close to 50 years, and it has changed over the years. It has evolved. In 2010, we chose to use only our own grapes, because as you may know as well, we are owners of grapes. We own we are owners and negotiants as well. So we decided to use only our grapes. And since the last vintages, it's been really the Ribeauvillé terroir and the Ribeauvillé parcels of vineyards we have in our village, so right in the middle of Alsace, where we have actually quite a lot of marl and limestone soils, which give this wine this beautiful minerality and beautiful freshness. There's always a lot of wind in Ribeauvillé, which also keeps this freshness, the acidity quite high. And we like dry wines, as you know. And so we vinify as dry as possible. My 18 might be a little richer than your 17, because 17 is, we can say, a more classic vintage in a way, but there are no more classics nowadays. It's a very classic style of Riesling from Alsace, as we think it should be. dry, beautiful minerality, and yes, a great way to start an evening with some oysters or something fresh.
Fantastic.
So
And
Ribeauvillé, really Ribeauvillé identity.
do you have any special story or memory you can share about this wine in particular?
Memories, I don't know, but yes, actually, yes. Sometimes I'm very surprised when I travel, and probably my best memory with this wine was a customer that loves our wine. He comes to a tasting and he brought a bottle, it was maybe 4 years ago, of Riesling 1990 Reserve that I tried very, very rarely. I maybe tried it 2 times before in my life. And I was a bit afraid, like, oh la la, it's just Reserve. It's not Frédéric Émile or Clos Saint-Thune, which are our great signatures and treasure bottlings. It's Reserve. Will it be okay? And it was just amazing. Plus the vintage 1990, but yes, that's a good memory of a Riesling Reserve to me. And thank you for bringing this wine again.
Wonderful. And we have a question from Wilfred in reference to the adjective minerality. So many wine tasters use the word minerality to discuss this particular element in a wine. How do you describe it?
I had a hard time to understand it, and it took me some years to really understand it. And I think the more I tasted and the more I felt it, I could yes, understand it myself. But it's more a sensation than anything else. It's nothing really on the nose. It's more like sensation of. It's always very difficult to explain, but sensation. My father said to me one day, go in the vineyard and take a stone, a limestone stone, and you will see what it means. And I laughed because I thought it was really, it was stupid, but at the end it helped me a lot, I think. But it's really this sensation of, how can you explain? Help me, the others, I'm not quite sure how to say, but sensation for sure. Nothing about me, the aromatics or the taste itself. But that's personal. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah. Anybody have anything else to add about minerality? I know it's it could be a controversial topic in our world. Licking the stones. Yeah. So we all seem to be learning about minerality by licking the stones. So thank you for that explanation. Great. So a question from Deborah. She's asking, as you're out and about in the U.S. and also the rest of your world markets, do consumers immediately know that this is a dry wine? We have a misperception in some parts of our country that Riesling equals sweet. So do you run into that, and how do you get around that?
I ran around that all the time, always. I still hear many people telling me, oh la la, Riesling is going to be too sweet for my taste. I don't like Riesling. It's difficult from Alsace. You never know what you get. And it's still kind of reality, even though Rieslings from Alsace are they are dry, most of them. The big names that you all know are dry today, and you can rely on the dryness of the wines today. But it's true that in the past, it has, in a way, ruined the image of the Alsace, because you never knew what you would buy. And even me today, I have difficulties. If I don't know the producer, I'm not quite sure I will buy Pinot Gris for sure, not Gewürz, even more, even less. And that's a reality, and it's very sad. So yes, now it's better, but it's still the image to build back again. And what I say to people, usually I force them to try my Riesling. Like, no, please trust me, try the Riesling, you love it. And they usually are very impressed, like, I love it. I love it. So yes. No, it's not on the label, unfortunately. It's on the back label. It said it's a dry Riesling, but not on the front. It's not just like that you would know if you don't know Trimbach.
And one last question before we move on to the second wine. And this is always a big one, climate change. How are you seeing that? And if you can answer very briefly.
Yes, very briefly. 30 degrees today. I'm in t-shirts. I'm very warm still now. My windows are open. It's 7:30 in the evening. 15 years ago, I was wearing a double jacket and everybody was freezing outside waiting for the grapes to arrive and go home in the warm. So yes, it's very, very different. We harvest earlier. The degrees are very high. It's yes, it's affecting a lot, and it's no more classic vintage like we used to have. And from the 90s to today, no more need to chaptalize anything. But in the old days, in the 80s, when my granddad was still in charge with my father, every year we needed to chaptalize almost every wine except Vendange Tardive, Late Harvest, and so on.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I have to say that this is one of my all-time favorite wines, and I always have a healthy supply on hand at home. So thank you for producing such a beautiful wine. With that, we're going to move on to wine number 2, and I'm going to turn it over to Laura Colombo. This is the Jean de Colombo Le Valdemar Saint-Péray 2018.
Bonjour Bethany. Again. So we are tasting the Saint-Péray. It's a small appellation just next to Cornas. So maybe most of the people were thinking, oh, with Colombo we will try Cornas tonight. But of course, this would have been the case if you were with my dad, but you're with me. So, so I'm trying what my dad has been doing for 30 years with Cornas to try to place Cornas on the big table around the world. I'm trying to do the same with Saint-Péray, which is a very unknown AOC in the Northern Rhone, but that is an incredible small AOC with a lot of biodiversity, a lot of nature, small plots of vineyards a bit everywhere in the middle of the forest. So a place you definitely all need to visit some, like everywhere maybe in the world, but this is my home. So this is a single vineyard wine in one of the oldest parts of the AOC, because Saint-Péray has been renowned in the 19th century, and especially for its bubbles. It was an AOC with a lot of bubbles, but it completely collapsed because it was not fashion anymore to make bubbles. It was maybe a bit too heavy. So it went from 1,000 hectares, the AOC, to almost 10 hectares. And these are part of the very, very few old vine that remain always planted in Saint-Péray. So it's old vine, co-planted, a bit like sometime in Alsace, Roussanne and Marsanne, that we harvest all together and vinify together. So 2/3 basically of Roussanne and 1/3 of Marsanne. We never really know because, like I told you, it is co-planted. The name of La Belle de Mai is the name of the area in Saint-Péray, but also it's moreover a tribute to my grandmother, because like I said, my parents were not at all in the wine. My dad, my grandmother actually was a chef in Marseille. She had a restaurant in a place called La Belle de Mai, which is an area in Marseille. My dad wanted to take over, but for my grandmother, there were no way. She said, no, you won't become a chef. You need to be a doctor, because 30 years ago, to be a chef was not as fancy as today. But so he failed in medicine. He finished as a pharmacist. And in pharmacy, there is just one way to become an enologist. So of course, when he created this wine that was on Chemin du Mois de Mai, he called it after the name of the restaurant of my grandmother. Voilà, it's a 2018 vintage with, exactly like Anne said, it's not a very traditional vintage, but we don't have very traditional vintage anymore. It is quite a bit richer. The good thing is, because it's old vine, we really see the difference today, because we got really, really hot summer now, and only the old vines can really manage to get rid of this high temperature and to keep freshness and minerality, I think.
So, getting a lot of comments from the group here that the aromatic complexity is stunning on this wine. It's really a beautiful wine, and the texture very rich and complex. We're curious, so many of us are familiar with Cornas and the terrain and the extreme terrain of Cornas. how does Saint-Péray compare to Cornas in terms of its landscape architecture, and also where is it situated compared to Cornas?
So basically, Saint-Péray is called Saint-Péray. That's the name of the AOC, of course, but it could be Cornas White, because the AOC are really, it's two villages that touch each other. It is the southern part of the northern Rhone. So we are at the, what we say in France, we are really at the border of the Mediterranean climate. In fact, we have a mix. If you go just 30 kilometers south of Saint-Péray or Cornas, you are in Provence. If you go 30 kilometers north, you are in Lyon, which is like really continental vegetation. So here in Saint-Péray and Cornas, we have the same climate with both like rosemary and juniper like Provence, but also like oak tree like in the continental place. So you get this specificity. And what makes, I think, Cornas and Saint-Péray very special among the other AOC in the Northern Rhone is that it's really wild. You don't have vines everywhere. If you visit us one day, and if you go to my parents' house or my house, I live on top of the hill in Saint-Péray, and my neighbor is a goat cheese grower, so he has goats. My other neighbor has bees. I have cows. We grow apple also. So it's not just vines, it's really polyculture. And for us, it's very important to have this diversity around the vineyards. And that's, I think, really the specificity of Cornas and Saint-Péray together.
And there's a question that came in from Clive. These two grape varieties, Marsanne and Roussanne, produce very stylistically different wines. Can you talk a little bit about the range of styles that you can make from these two varieties?
But it's interesting because we just finished harvest today, and especially on the vintage like this, which is very hot, if you go in the vineyard and harvest with us, you will definitely understand why people use more Marsanne than Roussanne in all the blend usually. Because Marsanne is good grapes, with big bay, a lot of juice, doesn't suffer from disease, doesn't suffer from heat. It's the perfect grapes in terms of volume. We use more Roussanne because we think Roussanne is a bit more, in fact, what we said, Marsanne is to make the wine, to make the volume of the wine, to make the juice, and Roussanne is for the aroma. It's more delicate, it's very small bay. Like her name, Roussanne, it means that it's a bit red when it is ripe. So you get more tannin, that is important to the wine actually. And moreover, which is very important for us today because we are in the south of France a bit, so a lot of heat also. Sometimes not a lot of acidity. So we play a lot with bitterness today. And I know that sometimes bitterness can be a bad word for people in the wine industry. But I think for us, it is really part of the balance of the wine. And the Roussanne brings this bitterness, which will balance with the alcohol and make a balanced wine. I think that's, for me, that's my key today to work with this.
Thank you. And just to wrap up, I know that cooking is very, very central to your family's DNA. You're the ultimate entertainers, and a meal at the Colombo home is something of an experience that you'll never forget. So when you're drinking this wine at home, what is your favorite food pairing?
So if it's at home, I think there is a very, it's not really basic, but it's really what we like to pair. It's coming, like I said previously, from our godfather, Paul Bocuse. C'est une poularde en demi-deuil, so it's basically a big chicken that we stuff with truffle under the skin, and we cook it in the oven like this, and it gives a lot of flavor, and well, it's the best pairing for me with cream.
Sounds fantastic. Laura, thank you very much for sharing this wine.
Good.
Um,
Okay.
So I think we'll move on to our third wine now, which is Trebellini. And I'd like to invite Alessia to join us to talk a little bit more about this wine.
Yes. Okay. Can you hear well to that now?
Um,
Can you hear me?
Come just a little bit closer, I think.
Okay. Like this?
Perfect.
Okay. So, yes, today I'm presenting the Gattinara 2016. I have to tell you that we are, I think, at the end of the number of bottles that are available because we are moving to 2017 very soon. In a couple of weeks, we are going to present 2017. And
Sorry,
so,
Alessia, we're having a bit of trouble hearing you.
okay, it's better now?
Yes, good.
Okay, okay, I try to speak a little louder. So I was saying that probably this will be one of the last bottles that you can find on the market because we are going to present the new vintage that will be 2017 and it will be released on the market I think in a couple of weeks maximum. And so today I can say that this wine has about 1 year of bottle refining, bottle aging. So I think it's a very nice moment to drink this wine, even if it's still very fresh, it's very young. If you think about that, it's of 2016. Probably the first thing that you can feel is the freshness. But beside this, I want to tell you something more about this specific wine because this one is one of the historical label of the family, and because at the beginning, my great grandfather used to make. This Gattinara and the Riserva. So this wine was the wine to drink daily, and the Riserva was the special selection obtained with the special selection of the best area, and so was the wine to leave in the cellar and for maybe the special occasion. So this is why I say this is one of the historical labels, but also is the flagship wines because it's called simply Gattinara as the name of the appellation where we are, the DOCG appellation, and it's one of the best expression and interpretation of
Yeah, I
that.
think I got it sent to me by email.
Yeah.
Okay. This because Gattinara appellation extends on 4 different hills, and Travaglini, the company, has the vineyards in all 4 different hills. This is important because actually each single hills has a particular difference in terms of in terms of rocks, in terms of the composition of the soil, in terms of altitude and the exposure to the sun. Also, the single vineyards that we have on each single hills has different age. So this Gattinara actually is obtained by blending together all the vineyards of the property, of course, except the selection for the Riserva and for all the other wines that we produce. All the rest is blended together for making the classic Gattinara right after the end of the aging process. This is because during the harvest we maintain separately, of course, each single vineyard, and then we blend together after almost 2 years and a half. Actually, this is because this wine, of course, is aged for 3 years in total. Actually, it ferments in the stainless steel tanks following the traditional red wine fermentation, and then stays in the stainless steel tanks for about 3 months. Then is moved to the cellar right after in January usually. We move this wine in the barrels, in the big Slovenian oaks barrels, and it remains for about 30 months, 25 to 30 months. And then, of course, it's bottled and some months refining in the bottle. As I said before, is one of the best interpretation of Gattinara. This is because we have all the vineyards in all the area of this beautiful appellation.
Fantastic. And I know the question comes up quite frequently when I'm working with Gattinara out in the marketplace, but a lot of folks are familiar with Barolo and Barbaresco and ask how Gattinara compares to those 2 arguably larger names out at least in the U.S. market. How would you describe it?
Of course, the South Piedmont, so Langhe, Barolo, and Barbaresco is a very important area, and but actually Gattinara, it's a really small one, but it's the biggest in the North Piedmont. Actually, Gattinara is located in the really North Piedmont to Rosa Mountain foothills. We are, just for let you understand where we are exactly between Milan and Turin, and around 1 hour and a half from Alba, from the middle of the Langhe. So we are actually pretty close, but the two appellations are completely different because the two mainly different are the soil, the composition of the soil, and the microclimate. And this is what makes the differences between a Barolo and a Gattinara. This because, for example, talking about the soil, actually our soil is mainly based on rocks. Rocks like porphyry, iron, and granite are the mainly one. And when I say we have a very important composition, is because sometimes happen that walking between the rows of the vineyards, you can walk directly on the rocks. And this what when we speak about the minerality, actually we speak about something that comes from directly from the soil because the roots go deeply between the rocks. And the second things that differs from the South Piedmont is the microclimate, because we are very close to the Rosa Mountain, and it is very important for its influence on our territory. This because all the Rosa Mountain chain makes a sort of wall that protects Gattinara from, for example, the wind from Atlantic Ocean or the North Europe. So that's why during the winter we have higher temperature than the south, and during the summer is completely the opposite. We have less humidity, the temperature are a little below or a little lower, and then we have the influence of the lake that makes an important excursion thermix from night and day. This is very important for the elegance, the final elegance of this wine.
Fantastic. Alessia, we have a question concerning aging potential for Gattinara. So vintage variation aside, in general, what would you recommend is the ideal optimum aging capacity for Gattinara in general? And what is your preference in terms of when you like to drink it?
Actually, the age potential of this wine is pretty long because, for example, we had the chance to taste more bottle from 1967, 1964, 1970, and actually we realized that this wine were impressively still alive. Actually, you have always to think about what is a Nebbiolo. So the Nebbiolo basically has a very important life and a very important structure. And also, if you think that what makes a wine potentially good for a great age are the tannins, the acidity, and it also could help the minerality because the complexity of this wine comes basically from the rocks. If you analyze this wine, is more complex than a wine from the south because of the difference of the soil. But actually, when you taste it, when you drink it, you cannot feel this complexity because it's very I would say it's very delicate on the palate. So of course, if you want to feel to smell these beautiful floral perfumes and this freshness, this fruity on the palate, I suggest you to drink this wine in 10 years. But if you like the aged wines, if you like to taste a completely different portfolio of perfumes, I can suggest you to drink in more than 20 years.
Excellent. Thank you. And one last question. The shape of this bottle. Laura was talking about it earlier in our session, but can you just give us a little bit of history as to how this came about?
Yes. First of all, I would like to say that we have 7 different products on our portfolio, and we use this special bottle only for the 3 Gattinara, and then it's Sogno, that is the wine dedicated to my grandfather. This because in actually in 1958, that was also the first vintage where my grandfather produced this wine. He designed personally this special bottle because at the time before he inherited the winery. Sorry, actually, the wine and the techniques for making the wine were not the same, of course, that we have now, especially in Gattinara. I'm talking about Gattinara. And so it was easy to find some sediments in the bottle only after maybe a couple of years. And my father was obsessed by the sediments on the glass. So that's why he designed this particular bottle with this belly on the front. And when you pour the wine in that way, actually the sediment can stay in the belly of the bottle. So this is important because, of course, it's patented. Down here, there is the number of the patent, and it always remained the bottle, the symbol of the Travaglini. Because actually, there is a story behind this. Because in 1980, a journalist described this bottle as bad-looking and horrible, and so my grandfather decided to bottling the 1982 Reserva, half quantity in this bottle and the other half in the Bordeaux bottle shape. But at the end of the year, he realized that the Bordeaux bottles remain unsold because people could not recognize the Gattinara from Travaglini. So he decided to continue and to still use his project, this idea, and now became the symbol, of course, of our Gattinara.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alessia. Appreciate it. And we'll move on to our last wine of the day today. It's the Bodegas Caro. So Laura, I would like to invite you to join us once again to talk a little bit more about this beautiful wine.
Thank you, Bethany. There's a really good question from Pat Thompson about women in families going into, the office or the vineyard. We're going to answer that later, right? Yes. Okay. Because I think that's a really good, important question.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah. So Bodegas Caro, sorry, I don't know if you see it, but here's the label.
Yeah, we see it.
And I actually have in my background the cellar, which was built in 1884. Bodegas Caro, our partnership bought this part of a very old building. And so it's kind of a beautiful thing, because we're partners with the Rothschild family and such an old winemaking tradition. And we live in this ancient building. And it feels like we've been making the wine for 100 years, but the first vintage was the 2000. So I told you a little bit about the story of how we met and how the project started and was named. But really the basis of this wine was bringing back to life this Malbec Cabernet Sauvignon blend, which had basically been lost by the world because this, which was the most important blend, Malbec was much more important than Merlot in the 18th and 19th century in Bordeaux. In 1855, when the Grand Crus were classified, there was a lot more Malbec planted. In fact, the Encyclopedia Britannica says that there was even more Malbec than Cabernet Sauvignon in the Médoc. This is the Encyclopedia Britannica from 1889. If any of you want all this data, I have spent the last 10 years of my life doing historical research on Malbec. But anyhow, so this beautiful blend of Malbec Cabernet Sauvignon, which was on its way to being extinct, we were able to bring back. And what's exciting about this project is that, it's a partnership with the Lafite Rothschild family, who are arguably the world experts on Cabernet Sauvignon, and our family, which is known for pioneering and resuscitating Malbec. So here comes this beautiful wine. And I loved what Laure said about bitterness, because I think that in winemaking and wine blending and when you're making decisions, it's really important to be aware of the bitterness, because people don't want things to be too sweet and too soft. You need a little bit of bitterness so that you can soften it. And then that combination of a little bit of bitterness with the softness, it's what's so magical about wine. Why wine to me tastes so much better than beer or spirits or any other alcoholic drink, or basically any other drink at all. But so the Malbec, it softens the Cabernet Sauvignon, which is a little more bitter. And that is why the Malbec was always blended. And in fact, in some of these old French texts, the writers say you must always blend Malbec with Cabernet Sauvignon because it's the bitterness and the softness. And when they come together, you get this beautiful, rich wine that also has, you know, a structure and una espina, like a central chord. But in terms of this particular vintage, it's interesting because 17 was a small vintage. It was cold for a couple of days. We had a frost, and that's why it was small. But in general, it was warm. And it was one of these vintages where the Malbec was remarkably better in Altamira, where the vineyard is for Bodegascaro, than the Cabernet Sauvignon. So generally this blend is half and half, but for this vintage, it's 74% Malbec and 26% Cabernet Sauvignon. But for me on the palate, it's a 50-50, but it has a lot more Malbec. We use the barrels that are made at Domaine Baron de Rothschild. So they're sent from France. They're made by the Rothschild family. And the wine has about 80% new oak. But anyhow, for me, it's a very special wine because it brings back history, and it's the new history of Argentina, of our two families. And the one other comment I would make is that my husband really, really loves this wine. And so we often drink it when we go out to dinner. And it ages really, really beautifully. If you are able to get a hold of, you know, the 2002 vintage, the 2006, the 2010, they are really stunning. So thank you. Salud.
Thank you so much. There was a comment that there's a beautiful angularity to this wine that invites food pairing too. So I completely agree. And wow, what a fantastic vintage. Thank you so much. So I think what I would like to do is get back to Pat's question. The question was on the topic of women and wine in general. So a decade ago, a female winemaker in Montalcino told Pat Thompson that 30% of her enology class was female, but almost none of them got hands-on winemaking jobs. Most of them ended up in the front office. What would you say is the case now from your direct experience or anecdotally in the industry? Laura, do you want to start?
So yeah, I can start. So when I started, you know, working with my father, that I was still doing medicine and wine in 1995, you know, there weren't 30% female, women studying enology. In Argentina, I would say it was less, but it changed very quickly to today. It's probably 40% are women. But really, all the top positions were men. There were some women in winemaking. There were no women in viticulture. And many of the women would go study winemaking and then go to the business side. But even more horrifying to me when I started was that, you know, the women were running the show, but they had a male boss that like was just the boss. So, you know, I became very passionate when I started about the fact that we had these extraordinary women. You know, there had to be equal pay. That was the first thing. You know, if you have a certain job, you should get paid the same as a man. And, you know, I'm ashamed to say that I found a few situations where, you know, people were doing the same thing and the woman was getting paid less. And so that's something that I work, you know, a lot with a human resources person so that there's equal parity. And in terms of positions, the same thing. You know, our head of viticulture for, you know, the most famous vineyard that we have for Catena is a woman, but she's quite young because, you know, and she was, I think, 1 out of 3 women in her class. Now there's more women. The head of viticulture for Bodegascaro is a woman. She is incredible, and she's a soil specialist, and she's, I think, 26 years old, but she's really, you know, just incredible. She's worked in France. I mean, she knows so much. And the first winemaker for Bodegascaro was Estela Perinetti, who really, for a long time, was other than Susana Balbo, the only other well-known women winemaker. So I think that the comment from Pat, you could say it about the world. And in terms of my opinion about we women, you know, of power, you know, all the other winemakers presenting here from around the world, is that we can't just wait for things to happen. You know, we need to go there and have the difficult conversations with the uncles and the cousins and you know, men and women, and make things happen. And actually, when men see how well the organization works, when there's, you know, just as high an amount of women and men in power, they become the biggest fans, which I think was what Anne was saying of her great uncle, that like he's the biggest fan of her because he sees how incredible she is. So anyhow, I'm very positive about the future, but I think that the past is a little scary.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add to Laura's answer?
I can only say that it's particularly interesting to hear about your story because, of course, you are older than me. And when I was younger, it was already a word that was almost in a very, I cannot say totally equal gender balance, but actually was in a very beautiful situation. I think it's better than what was in the past. So to me, I cannot see, in my opinion, I cannot see the very important differences in the single jobs and the single words. For what concerns Travaglini, for example, I always speak about my grandfather, but I have to tell you that my grandfather could reach the results that he reached thanks to my grandmother, because they share completely the activity, and my grandfather was the front man, was the man who decided, but also the person who had to manage the offices. But everything that was from bottling to working in vineyards, almost all the season of the years was my grandmother. And today, actually, I could say 30% of the total staff is of women, is made of women. And also my personal family, we are 3 female, and only the only male is my father. So actually, to my personal opinion is that we are moving in a very good direction. And I agree with you, Laura, that the past could be something dark, and from today and the future would be, of course, better.
Great. And Clive had a question concerning, you know, I think you touched on where you're finding support as a woman in this industry, but where do you continue to see the biggest challenges as a woman in the wine industry?
I cannot hear you. It was directly to me.
And to anybody on the panel, if you have a thought on it, or we can throw it out to the group. But the biggest challenges today as a woman in the wine industry, what would you say that is your biggest challenge today?
Of course, it's I go forward to something that I was speaking about. So today, actually, sometimes could be strange, but to me, to my personal experience and to my opinion, nowadays it's even more frequently to find a woman in wine. I know not only in Italy, but all over the world, that from a generation to the other and to the new one, actually sometimes happen that a woman can have the control of the winery and can be the front woman of the winery. So you have always to be strong to do all kind of words, of course, but actually it would be speaks about the total equality of the gender.
Great, thank you. Laura, as a veteran on our panel here, what would you say remain the biggest challenges for you as a woman in the industry?
Well, you know, I also read another comment that said, when will this be a thing, talking about women?
Yeah.
I have to say that when I started, I was actually always kind of annoyed when I'd be asked to join a women's symposium, because I thought, you know, I'm on equal standing. And I came from medicine where, you know, I really just worked with men, you know, on equal standing from the beginning, because there's more women doctors than there were women winemakers. But I think that, you know, more recently, there has been a consciousness that there's just still so much work to be done, and that actually I find that men are particularly interested, just as interested as women, because they see that when they work in mixed groups, you know, more things get done, it's more fun, it's more interesting. So you know, I I am now very excited to join in this conversation. I think it has as much to do with men as with women. And I say something very controversial that my daughter said that, like, I should be put in jail for saying this. So please, I don't know if you're the journalist, if you think it's awful, don't write it. But I say that actually there's something that, to me, there's not male equality either. Because, there's still, for example, if I've heard this at my own winery, you ask, a man says, I have to go home because my kid's sick. And their boss, who's a man, says, well, where's your wife? That still happens. Men are not allowed to take on, if a man says, I have to go home early because I have to make dinner, people think it's strange. If a woman says it, everybody understands. So to me, there's such a long road for both men and women. And I think that this new conversation we're having today is more interesting. It's not from a place of anger, it's from a place of progress and what we all want. And I'm very excited about the future. But I think that in order for this conversation to happen, there have to actually be more numbers of women in power positions. And that's what we're seeing today on this conversation today, among the journalists and among these women from these very historic families that have important roles. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So keeping an eye on time here, and we don't want to take up too much of your days, but I just wanted to open the floor. If anybody has any additional questions for our panelists, or would just like to chat with some of your friends here online, we'd love to open the floor to do that. And either I've got a couple questions or actually comments remarking on the fact that women as consumers often get a slightly cold shoulder too in wine shops and restaurants. If anybody would like to share an experience they had as a consumer, we would love to hear about that as well. Okay. Great. Well, I think we have a couple comments. Don't get me started. We could be here all day if we open that door. So I just wanted to thank all of our panelists and our moderator very much for the time today, but more so all of you for joining us and spending part of your day with us. And as I said, fantastic to see all of you and have everyone together, and really can't wait till we can do this again online and more so in person. So thank you very much. And we are happy to answer any questions that come up after the fact. Just reach out to me and we will direct the questions appropriately. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the world. And if I could just ask our panelists to stay on for an extra minute, we're going to take a photo of the four of you together. So thanks very much, and see you all soon. Cheers.
Salud.
Salud.